Jim, I think we're good.
Okay. You want me to go ahead and kick her off?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your participation in this GROW PA event that is being sponsored by not only GRCA, the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance, but also GROW PA from the Philadelphia Chamber, and most importantly today, Penn State Berks, Penn State University Berks campus. So we thank you all for your participation today, and we welcome you. Let me start with a thank you to Penn State Berks and Dr. Hillkirk for your leadership in putting this together. This is a great opportunity for us in the business community in Berks County to really talk about ways that we can continue to energize growth in Berks County and do that through collaboration and certainly innovation, which is the main topic for our conversation today. The Philadelphia Chamber also has been a great leader across the Commonwealth with spearheading this GROW PA movement. And I've just recently come to know about it and start dialoguing with Rob Wonderling, who's the CEO of the Greater Philadelphia Chamber. And it's a very exciting initiative that we hope at GRCA to build on from this event and continue efforts to try to stimulate and energize our economy locally. Rob's going to give you some more background about GROW PA in a couple of minutes or towards the end of the agenda. But for just a starting point, it is an initiative to really get local business leaders across the Commonwealth to really be talking about what is needed to really stimulate and grow an economy in a local area. And they've identified certain pillars of growth, including infrastructure, healthcare, and education. And when we at GRCA look at those pillars, we're excited about the fact that we're already participating in a number of exciting initiatives and projects in Berks County that fall right along those lines. There's been recent discussion to reestablish passenger rail service from Reading down through the Schuylkill River corridor to Philadelphia, but just as importantly beyond that to Washington, D.C. and up to New York City. The Berks Alliance has been spearheading that, and there's going to be a lot of discussion across the community in the coming months on how we can get that accomplished, because it's going to be not only an important transportation infrastructure project, but a huge boon to our economic development efforts in the city of Reading and beyond in Berks County. A lot of great stuff is happening in healthcare in Berks County, including the Tower Health and Drexel University Medical School, which is now under roof. There's already some medical students from Drexel already up here in Berks County doing some work as third-year students. And eventually in the next couple of years, as that facility gets built out, a full-blown medical school is going to be up and running, and that's going to provide great opportunities not only to get good skilled doctors in Berks County, but also continue to do a lot of medical innovation. And then thirdly, in the area of education, post-secondary education in particular, a lot of great discussion going on about workforce development and also with the College Town project in downtown Reading that will allow for the establishment of a campus downtown by Alvernia University, which will have some exciting programs. But I'd also want to point out Penn State's great interest in the city of Reading and the work that's going to be happening, I think, in the future. As Dr. Hillkirk probably knows, Penn State St. Joe's has great interest in the old community general hospital property and taking a look at how that can be revitalized from an economic standpoint, but also from an educational standpoint, and even provide greater educational opportunities in healthcare for those in Berks County. So we're excited about the early conversations we're having with Penn State St. Joe's. And of course, Penn State Penn State Berks is already well established in downtown Reading with its Launchbox initiative at GoggleWorks. And they've been working really well with young entrepreneurs, students at Penn State to find ways from an innovation standpoint to get new businesses identified and up and running. So we congratulate Penn State Berks in your initiative there at GoggleWorks. And I would make one other observation with regard to that Launchbox presence at GoggleWorks. You know, since the outbreak of COVID, just like in other parts of Pennsylvania and across the country, there's been a great need for PPE personal protection equipment. And there was a voluntary initiative launched immediately after this COVID situation really came into the presence of everybody, business, healthcare providers, et cetera. What's called the Berks PPE Resource Network, to provide PPE materials and equipment and masks to those in need in Berks County. The Launchbox folks at Penn State Berks have been an absolutely integral part of that, offering their services, offering their equipment, student volunteers. So that network has produced 62,000 items of PPE since its inception, helping 240 organizations just in Berks County with their PPE needs. So that network would not have been possible, and its impact would not have been possible without the Penn State Berks efforts at their GoggleWorks Launchbox site. And so we thank them for their participation and their community service there. So if this whole afternoon is going to be about innovation, it's also got to be about collaboration. And I see a lot of great signs across Berks County of business leaders, educational leaders, philanthropic leaders who want to come together and find ways to grow this economy in a lot of different areas. In a GRCA, we're going to be right in the center of that, working with all of you to make that happen and bring those projects to fruition. So welcome everybody. Again, thank you to Penn State Berks as well as Grow PA out of the Philadelphia Chamber for your leadership in putting this together. We look forward to a great event.
Thanks, Jim. This is Keith Hillkirk. Chris, would you go ahead, and thank you. I'd also like to thank our partners. This event has taken more than a year to plan. Because of the pandemic, we shifted from an in-person event that would have occurred at GoggleWorks to today's virtual event, but I appreciate all of you joining us. In addition to the partners which Jim Gerlach mentioned, I'd also like to thank the Penn State University Office of Research. We're going to be hearing in just a moment from James Delattre. And then also the Government Relations Office at University Park has been very helpful in planning for today's conversation. 5 years ago, Penn State President Eric Barron announced the Invent Penn State program, a new vision for Penn State extension for Pennsylvania's land-grant university. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. James Delattre, who is the Associate Vice President for Research, as well as the Director of the Office of Entrepreneurship and Commercialization. And Dr. Delattre will be providing an overview of the Invent Penn State initiative. Dr. Delattre.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Jim, and to the folks at the Greater Reading Chamber. And thank you, Rob and Liz at Grow PA for the invitation here. This is truly an honor. So today I'll be giving you some background on the Invent Penn State initiative. Next slide, please. The roots of Invent Penn State trace themselves back to when Penn State President Eric Barron was getting ready to join the university as president. He traveled to all 24 campus locations and had a series of meetings with chancellors, with faculty, industry leaders, and folks in the economic development community. And he saw a pattern emerge. Certainly, many of our communities across Pennsylvania have real needs, and many of them trace their economic issues back to manufacturing decline in the 70s. And then in the intervening years, social issues have been overlaid. So he saw that consistently and recognized that as an anchor institution in these communities, Penn State had a responsibility to actively work with partners to provide lift there. He saw that we have many entrepreneurial students and community members, but didn't necessarily have the resources or training to be successful in turning their ideas into a business. He recognized that as a university, we have an unbelievable research portfolio. We just announced this week that the university's research enterprise has reached over $1 billion. But his sense was that too many of those innovations were stuck on lab benches or destined maybe to end their existence in a publication. They weren't necessarily making their way into the marketplace to create societal and economic impact at the scale we would want. And he saw that industry was seeking talent, looking for updated skill sets to meet the 21st century needs. And many industries were looking for innovations that would allow them to be competitive in an increasingly competitive marketplace. So he saw all of that. Next slide, please. And he committed Penn State to be a driver of job creation, economic development, and student career success. And underneath that, over the last 5 years, we've launched 20 different programs that work to invest in our research and get it into the marketplace, so research commercialization. Many programs that support entrepreneurs with the goal of driving those innovations into the marketplace, rooting businesses in our communities, helping to address social issues, and help industry transform and be competitive. Next slide, please. Now, Keith mentioned extension, and President Barron, as he described in Penn State, talks about economic development extension. Next slide. And for those of you that aren't familiar with extension, it's generally expressed in the form of our land grant commitment to supporting agriculture, right? So this is Penn State at its founding. If you really drill down here, we were training business people, farmers, who I view in many ways to be the ultimate entrepreneurs, how to be successful in their field of endeavor. Next slide. And over the years, ag extension, of course, has grown and has become a huge asset for the agricultural industry and farmers of Pennsylvania. We now have an ag extension office in every county in Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. So President Barron asked the question, how do we match that same level of service for other businesses beyond the agricultural industry and farmers? How can we take the know-how that resides inside of the university and turn it outward to support folks that come to us with challenges or ideas? And that's what that idea gave birth to what we call our innovation hubs, or more commonly launch boxes. This is a collection of images from launch boxes across the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. And so as of today, we've got 21 innovation hubs across the Commonwealth, one in each of our Commonwealth campus communities. They're not all called launch boxes, and they don't all have the service model. But one thing that's really important to underscore here is that these are not just student focused. They're not just for folks that go to Penn State or Penn State fans. These are open to the community, the same way that our extension offices support anyone who has a challenge. The launch boxes are similarly tasked to help anyone in the community that has a business idea and helps advance that towards the marketplace. Next slide, please. Each launch box is completely different, and that's because they were designed in partnership with the local community and designed to recognize the strengths of each community and also to fill gaps that existed in those communities. We've seen a pattern emerge of services. Many of the launch boxes have co-working spaces. We're of course familiar with WeWorks, and we know that co-working is essential in large markets. If you look across smaller communities in Pennsylvania, they've often lacked flexible office space and a network to bring entrepreneurs together and to provide services to them. So the launch box serve that role in many communities. Product development support for small and medium-sized businesses that are looking to launch a new product and perhaps work with a Penn State student that may be a future hire. We have a number of startup accelerator programs. Most are aligned with the National Science Foundation's I-Corps program. These programs help entrepreneurs accelerate and de-risk their business ideas. We also provide $3,000 micro grants to allow those businesses to go meet with industry and understand their customer and the competitive landscape. Penn State Law is all in on the launch boxes. They've opened 2 no-cost legal clinics, one that focuses on intellectual property, the other that works on corporate documents at no cost. This is an unbelievable service for the small businesses and startups of Pennsylvania. And again, not focused on Penn State faculty or students, but open to anyone who applies. They have online applications, and they meet through Zoom. We have 25 attorneys that are second-year law students primarily that report to bar certified attorneys that oversee that work. So we've got a burgeoning law firm happening in State College that's now serving the whole Commonwealth. Of course, business plan and pitch competitions to help create energy and churn and provide award dollars to nascent entrepreneurs and to foster ideation, and youth and outreach programs that help young people that may not think about entrepreneurship as a potential path to be aware of both the opportunities and the very realistic challenges that are there. Many of the youth and outreach programs are focused on underrepresented groups. And this is the picture I show here is from the Lehigh Valley. This is something that as a university we're committed to, and I'm excited to talk about a new program that we're getting ready to launch later on here. But next slide, please, Chris. So over the first 3 years, the hubs were open. We've provided services to over 2,500 entrepreneurs, had thousands of Penn State services engaged in building their awareness of entrepreneurship as a potential path, if not now, in the future. Hundreds of products developed through different engagements. And of course, the law clinics have been very active with over 1,000 clients engaged in that 3-year period. So our community members have stepped up and provided very generous support. So over $8 million leveraged. Internships have been flowing. We've had over 200 teams graduate from the accelerator programs, and to date created nearly 150 full-time jobs out of the launch boxes. And we're just getting started, quite honestly. Next slide. So President Barron's idea of supporting new entrepreneurs turns out was more than just intuition. The data supports that there's a real need in Pennsylvania. So currently Pennsylvania is ranked number 46 nationally in terms of the rate of new entrepreneurs. This is far behind where I think we should be and collectively should expect to be given the history of innovation in Pennsylvania. Next slide. New starts are incredibly important when we recognize that over the last 40 years, nearly all the net new jobs created in the United States have been created by young firms, startup companies. Startup companies, of course, are in a growth phase. And this defies conventional wisdom in many ways. We often think about the large firms growing incrementally and that being the driver of job growth. In fact, we know that it's small firms and startup companies that drive job creation. So as we talk about a growth agenda, our view is that new entrepreneurs need to be at the center of that strategy. Next slide. And growing access to resources and getting more entrepreneurs included into our ecosystems must be an essential part of that strategy as well. It's a requirement going forward, quite honestly. U.S. Census Bureau recognized that while minorities make up 32% of our population across the country, the minority business ownership rate is only at 18%. Again, if we're going to grow, we need to create opportunities across underrepresented groups, and incremental improvements can create explosive results here. So the Kauffman Foundation, through modeling, indicated that if we were able to increase minority-owned firms by 10%, that translates into 1 million new jobs for people of color, and that's because minority founders hire minority employees. So there's an amplification that occurs if we invest in equitable entrepreneurship. Next slide. And so we're very proud to have recently received a gift from the Kauffman Foundation to have the launch boxes partner with a nonprofit called the Black and Brown Founders that was founded by a Penn State Berks alum, Ania Williams. And the goal is to, over the next year, deliver education and network building programs across the entire Launchbox network try to support and include more Black and Latinx entrepreneurs into the overall ecosystem, helping them understand how to navigate big questions like how they can attract capital to grow their business, how to leverage mentor networks, and so forth. So we're very excited to announce this partnership. Next slide, please. And while we often think about young people and startup and that kind of stereotypical, group of folks in front of their computers, fact of the matter is that in 1996, young people launched 35% of new companies, and today that number is down to 18%. So the notion of engaging people very early to think about entrepreneurship and giving them the resources and skills to do that is something that we think is very important. Next slide. So just to summarize some of the things that Penn State's already doing, but we see as elements of a growth strategy, are providing programs that deliver on new starts, pro bono business services that help resource-constrained individuals, and of course, getting underrepresented groups engaged in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Investing in research commercialization so that more of the inventions that are inside of Pennsylvania's borders become innovation and businesses. Programs that link legacy industries to university innovations, like the manufacturing PA program, we think are vital. And if we look at some of our peers, they've been very successful in that regard. 21st century degree programs that fuel high growth startup companies, we think from a higher ed standpoint is essential if Pennsylvania is going to reduce the brain drain that we've seen over the decades, and supporting advanced manufacturing, of course. And access to grants, loans, and venture capital. We know that these are essential for explosive growth. So Penn State is supporting all of these elements to a degree, but we know that if we're really going to move the needle for Pennsylvania, it needs to be all hands on deck. And that's why we are absolutely delighted to work with folks that are on this call, and Grow PA in particular, because they have the capacity to pull together stakeholders from all over Pennsylvania to drive that growth agenda. So I will conclude my comments there. Keith, shall I turn it back to you?
Sounds good. Thank you, James. Also, just a logistical comment or logistics comment, which would be that please feel free to use the Q&A. If you do have any questions as we're moving forward, we will provide some time for some conversation in a little bit. Before I share some specifics about what is going on in regard to Invent Penn State in our community, I'd like to just share a little bit about the foundation upon which we are doing this work. In terms of innovation, entrepreneurship, and job creation, there's been more than a decade of intensive efforts at Penn State Berks at the campus. And I want to just share with you that the Fleming Center for Creativity, Entrepreneurship, and Economic Development has been at the core of much of that work, directed by Dr. Shadan Kulturel-Konak. In addition, we offer the entrepreneurship minor on the campus, and you'll be hearing a little bit later a bit more about another program that goes on at Berks, the Learning Factory, that provides the opportunity for students to get involved in real-world problem solving, working with local manufacturers. But now I'd like to share some things specifically about what's happening in our community in regard to Invent Penn State and the Penn State Berks efforts. Our Launchbox, as I think Jim Gerlach mentioned, is now located for the last 3 years at Goggleworks in what used to be the gift shop. And here you see some examples of some of the various programming that goes on there. Of course, things have been a bit different since the pandemic a few months ago. But again, as Jim mentioned, the staff at the Launchbox have been deeply involved in helping to create PPE for our community. I also would echo another comment that he made, and I think you heard it from James Delattre as well. This is a public space, and we invite all members of the community to visit and to become engaged with the Launchbox. we're looking forward to when a vaccine arrives and we're able to get back to certainly as close to a full degree of normalcy as possible. Okay, Chris? So there's a number of things that go on at the Launchbox. They include community meetups, youth events, something we call Tinker Tuesdays. We also provide startup space for up to a year for new startups, co-working space that's available to them at no cost. There's training, mentoring, a secure Wi-Fi network that's available as well. And then over on the right there, you see the access to equipment, 3D printers, laser cutters, and other technology that's available there in the Launchbox, as well as mentoring from successful entrepreneurs and helping people with a new idea to be able to launch that new idea into fruition. Okay, Chris. Now, you also heard earlier that Penn State Berks is working along with Penn State Health St. Joseph. Originally, our Launchbox was started there at the downtown campus of St. Joe's. We ran into some venting issues because of the heat that's produced by 3D printers, and that led to what has turned out to be a great new home at GoggleWorks. But we also are continuing to work with Penn State Health St. Joseph on a number of initiatives. I'm going to highlight just one of those. That's the Veggie RX fruit and vegetable prescription program, being partially funded by our United Way, in addition with help from Penn State Health and the Penn State College of Medicine. And what's happened over the last 2 years now, as this pilot has been rolled out, is that we've had 111 patients who have been enrolled in the program, with over 250 family members impacted. These are individuals who need to make some nutritional changes. Nearly $50,000 has been spent through the scripts that are prescribed by physicians and are available to individuals and families, with an average drop amongst participants in A1C of 1.3%, which is quite significant. And as I mentioned, this is a partnership of Penn State Berks, Penn State Health St. Joseph, and the Penn State College of Medicine. At the Launchbox, since 2017, the Launchbox has supported 350 community members in seminars, classes, meetups, and presentations focused on businesses and startups, 131 entrepreneurs, 7 social enterprise startups, and 9 technology-based startups. And one of the startups, Coasty, which is a local company that manufactures paper straws, which are available in a number of retail sales locations in the community. The photograph there of the 2 individuals who are partnering in that startup. Okay, Chris. Recently, 2 of our startups that have been supported through the Fleming Center on campus, as well as the Launchbox, Traduki, which is a translation app, and then the Verde Mantis, which is a 3D printer manufacturing company. Those 2 startups were awarded a total of $25,000 through the Berks Alliance, the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance business competition, and the awards which will help those startups move forward in their and make progress with their new business creation. Okay, Chris. I'm going to read part of this slide, which I think is particularly pertinent to the core work of the Launchbox, our core effort. This is from Petros Papoulis, who is one of the partners in that Coasty enterprise that I mentioned a moment ago. Berks Launchbox employees, Patty Lashinsky and Michelle Nath, are like Swiss Army knives. Anytime you need help with something, they find a smart solution or mentor to help us get it done. The Launchbox help has been a big boost to moving our company forward. And I think that quote speaks to the heart the mission of the Launchbox and the overall mission and intention of Penn State. I'm also very pleased to announce that Penske has recently committed $500,000 to support the Launchbox and our efforts in the community. That $500,000 has been matched by the university to create $1 million endowment to support our work at the Launchbox and other efforts in the greater Reading community. There is also an additional $500,000 match that remains available from the university. And Dave Delattre, our Director of Development, and I are hard at work right now seeking to double the endowment to a $2 million endowment, which will ensure that this work will be able to go on well into the future. Thanks, Chris. Now, another part of today's event, which we're delighted to include and to be partnered with, relates to Grow PA. And we're very pleased that Rob Wonderling, who serves as President and CEO of the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, that Rob is here with us today. Rob leads a business advocacy organization that promotes growth and economic development in the 11-county Greater Philadelphia region. Rob served in the Pennsylvania State Senate from 2002 to 2009, and also previously had served as Deputy Secretary of Transportation during the Ridge administration. He serves on numerous boards and commissions and has been recognized by a number of organizations for his community involvement, including the Anti-Defamation League's Americanism Award, the Service to Humanity Award from the March of Dimes, and he was also named State Public Official of the Year by Pennsylvania Bio. Rob earned a baccalaureate in arts from Allegheny College and a master's in government administration from the University of Pennsylvania. Rob Wonderling.
Well, thanks for that very kind introduction, and allow me, before I go a step further, to also acknowledge and really offer our gratitude to Jim Gerlach and his colleagues at the Reading Chamber of Commerce. Jim, I was thinking about it as I was listening to your welcome and your quick report from your Chamber of Commerce. You're definitely the right leader at the right time when we consider our pre and post pandemic world that we live in, and you bring such a great set of leadership experience, expertise, and vision, and really pleased that we're now working together in this role. We first met, I think, when you were still serving in the State House, when I did serve in the Ridge administration, and vigorous debates at that point in time whether to raise revenue to fund roads and bridges and transit, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And to really the team at Penn State University, we're really excited to be restarting this partnership via Grow Pennsylvania. As was alluded to previously, we actually got out of the gate at Penn State Barron. It was literally, I think, 2 or 3 days before we moved into the shelter in place and various federal, state, and local restrictions on movement at the outset of the global pandemic and the outbreak of COVID-19. And so here we are. Again, like all of us wish we were doing this virtually at the Launchbox in Berks County, or excuse me, physically at the Launchbox in Berks County, but glad to do so virtually. I'm going to take a few moments because I think, like our other participants, very eager to hear our keynote today. But I do think it's important for us to, and for me to explain a bit about Grow Pennsylvania. I want to stress from the outset, my role and the role of our Chamber of Commerce is to be catalytic to a broad community of interest throughout the entire Commonwealth. And most notably, like Jim's Chamber of Commerce, close to 80 locals of Chamber of Commerce that dot the Pennsylvania landscape that pre-pandemic, if that's how we measure time, and post-pandemic, have always been the center of gravity for innovation, for community engagement, for driving free enterprise throughout Pennsylvania. So I only am here today wearing my Grow Pennsylvania hat and doing so in service to the other local chambers of commerce throughout Pennsylvania and our partners. A bit about this fledgling but hopefully fruitful partnership with Penn State University and why you're seeing a broad theme around innovation is that one of the principles around Grow Pennsylvania is just that our Commonwealth, as we were moving through the last century, literally led the world in virtually every statistical measure that you can think of around innovation, whether it be applied R&D, capital, intellectual property, and patents issued, and the list would go on and on. Particularly at the dawn of this century in the early 2000s, we began to decline, and this was validated in a work that was done by the Brookings Institute about 1.5 to 2 years ago that we had a hand in, that as a Commonwealth representing 12.5 million citizens, not so much the government or governments of Pennsylvania, we began to lag behind on what I think we already heard from today, the cornerstones and attributes and recipes around creating a community of entrepreneurs and organizations that will drive innovation. And that then ultimately gets to the strategic objectives of Grow Pennsylvania, which are 3. 1, we need to grow Pennsylvania. We're in significant population decline, most pronounced when you move out of the metropolitan areas of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and the Lehigh Valley and South Central Pennsylvania. Pre-pandemic, we experienced a decade of significant decline in wealth and very limited opportunity for intergeneration and transfer of wealth for all Pennsylvanians. And in many respects, it was more than a lost decade, almost 20 years of lost per capita of income per average Pennsylvanian. And then 3rd, and now more than ever, we need to grow the economy of the Commonwealth and recover the economy of the Commonwealth via the creation of jobs. Oftentimes in our sort of public dialogue, we always focus on jobs. Jobs are the coin of the realm. Politicians like to run for re-election on jobs created or programs to create jobs, but that may not be what matters most, particularly right now in this pandemic world that we live in. What we think what matters most is do everything we can to retain existing Pennsylvanians and create an opportunity strategically over the next decade or so where Pennsylvania is a magnet for individuals to come to learn and work and thrive and create the next generation of entrepreneurs and innovative organizations through Pennsylvania. That's why we have so many folks across this Commonwealth committed to Grow Pennsylvania. A bit about the attribute of Grow Pennsylvania, why I think this partnership with Penn State is so critical and with our local Chamber of Commerce networks, in that we really do believe it's a bottom-up approach. We believe this pre-pandemic, and we now more than ever believe that if we're going to build a vibrant economy that's innovative and creative and creates intergenerational wealth for Pennsylvania citizens, it needs to start in community by community. It needs to be grassroots. No offense to those of us that served in public office, Jim and I included, but not necessarily a legislative initiative can scale to the degree that we need now in the Commonwealth. We need to plant the seeds of entrepreneurship through the partnerships that we've already heard from today, nurture them and grow them over a period of time. So this is very strategic. It's hard work. It requires a lot of humility, a lot of diversity of thought and perspective, and a willingness to keep working. It doesn't suggest that we're going to ignore our partners in the public sector at the federal, state, and local level. They're key partners. But we do think that we've entered an age, both pre and post-pandemic, where grassroots movements, and we're seeing this unfold in areas around social justice, are not just the wave of the future. They're the processes now in which you have the potential to create good outcomes and good results. And so we view this as not being any different than that. A bit about what we hope to achieve through the Grow Pennsylvania infrastructure, and particularly via our partnership with Penn State University, is that we have begun and will continue to cross-pollinate really good ideas that are developed locally that spur innovation. And our hope is with our friends and relationships at Penn State, with James and his team, as we're building and crowdsourcing those ideas, they become perhaps subjects for research at the university. I love the history of the agricultural extensions and the vision that Dr. Barron laid out for the launch boxes. And what we hope to achieve during the course of this year and the years to follow is crowdsource and build really good ideas that not exclusively, but the university will take under consideration for further, more rigorous research, move beyond the anecdote, do some scholarly work. And then what you've created through a network of local chambers of commerce and other community interests is a potential test bed or test beds through the launch boxes and through other community vehicles to test out new and innovative ideas to create entrepreneurial organizations throughout Pennsylvania. So that sort of explains a bit more the infrastructure. And then just one final aside, we love the launch boxes. In fact, when we had our second strategic planning session for Grow Pennsylvania a couple of years ago, that was hosted by Vern Squire, who leads the Chester County Chamber of Business and Industry. We were really delighted that the Launchbox in Penn State hosted that for that gathering. So that's a bit of the overview of Grow Pennsylvania. And as I said a moment ago, I know I, like many others on this program, are looking forward to hearing from our keynote address. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to just pause for a moment in case anyone might have a question. You could use the Q&A or you could raise your hand if you'd prefer. But thank you, Rob, very much for giving us an overview of Grow PA. And I think I fully agree with you that the mission aligns directly with Invent Penn State and what we're trying to do through the launch boxes. Well, as Rob mentioned, it's exciting to have our keynote speaker today, who's become a friend over this last year, even though through virtual technology. But I'm really looking forward to hearing from Ariel Coro, who's going to be sharing some thoughts with us about innovation, in the innovation economy, and how diversity and innovation can enrich one another. Ariel is a leading technology expert in the community, in the Hispanic community nationally. He's also the author of the book El Salto, The Leap. In El Salto, he recommends that we make sure that we are leveraging new technologies in order to reach our potential. El Salto is published by Random House Vintage Español. And in addition, Ariel is the technology expert for Despierta America, comparable to Good Morning America in Spanish, and a tech contributor for CNN and Español. His educational message and passion for technology reach millions of homes weekly through television, radio, and the web. So Ariel, we're delighted that you're joining us. We look forward to hearing your comments.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Well, thank you. This has been an incredible opportunity, and I love all the data that you guys have shared. Now, let me share my screen. I have a presentation here. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. So give me 1 second here. So I have 2 desktops. So let me share that. Okay, what do you guys see?
How diversity enriches innovation.
All right, so we have the right screen. So we're gonna talk about diversity and innovation, and I wanted to guys tell you, first of all, thank you for inviting me to talk today. I think that is incredibly valuable how you guys are helping the different communities to get started, to support them, to grow their businesses, their startups. And it's really interesting. And today I'm going to share some thoughts about diversity and innovation. So I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I have a thick accent. I actually speaking Cuban with a very heavy American accent. I didn't have an accent when I came to this country, but let me tell you that some things don't go away. So To talk about innovation, we have to talk about creativity. And creativity is really about connecting different, putting things together. And you guys, you know what the ingredients are. You have the definition of science of creativity, which is a new idea that's good and useful. And then it's actually, it becomes innovation when you apply it to a problem. Now, the interesting thing here is that you have empires that are built because entrepreneurs can look at something as simple as a cup of coffee and say, wow, this is going to change the world. And thus the ingredients to get them started are actually quite simple. So I wanted to share with you guys some of the ingredients that got me started as an entrepreneur, as a community figure, helping people with technology. And I wanted to talk about not only how both, not only the factor of diversity, but also the factor of interdisciplinary exchange and how opening our minds can actually help us with a more diverse and inclusive workforce that can make sure that our products and services and our job growth is going in the direction that it needs to go. So I'm going to tell you where I'm from. I'm from Cuba, an island in the middle of the Caribbean. And as a warning, this is not political. There are no political ingredients in this presentation, but I know it is an election year and everything is political, but trust me, there are no political statements here one way or the other, okay? I was born in Cuba, an island in the middle of the Caribbean, which is basically North Korea light, okay? You have a government and it's light and it's tropical. You have a government telling you what to do. You have all these banners that instead of advertising Coca-Cola, they're advertising the government and telling you how you have to fight against the world. There's this bad enemy. And of course, this totalitarian regime was supported by the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc for many, many years. And then something happened in 1989. In 1989, the famous speech of Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall, basically led to the coming down of the Berlin Wall. And what ended up happening is that people really found out that Cuba was really being propped up and supported by the Eastern Bloc and Russia, and they had this economic agreement in place. And this economic agreement was sending millions and millions of dollars and resources to Cuba and to other countries. And then, but I wanted to explain to you guys how it worked. So in this Council for Mutual Economic agreement between Cuba and the Soviet Union, Cuba would take a box of cigars and they would send it to the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. And as an even and equalitarian exchange, they would send back a fully loaded oil tanker, okay? they are pretty good cigars, okay? What happens is that it didn't matter when the oil stopped flowing. What changed for the people was that the 90% of the oil coming into the country basically stopped. All the industries that were already in a crisis went down to the next level on a crisis. So there was no food to be found anywhere. Of course, the employment was a disaster in the country. All the industries have been destroyed by many years of mismanagement. And of course, a central government controlling everything that was making the infrastructure crumble all around. And of course, in the middle of all this, you still had all the banners around you telling you, hey, we're doing great. Remember that in this country specifically, the government controls all the media and all the public message that gets out. So people are told one thing, and of course, there was a running joke that people, the place to go shopping for food was at the newscast because that's where they talked about all the food that was available. So the government in the middle of the crisis decided that they needed to do something. So all the big brains got together and said, well, what do we have? They took inventory and they said, well, we have these beaches, this beautiful place, tropical climate. We have this historical place and we want to put something together. So they partnered with European and international hotel companies to come in and take over all the hotel industry because they didn't know how to operate it very well. They didn't have the know-how. And these companies came to Cuba, they built these massive hotels, and then the tourists started coming. Well, the problem is that the tourists wanted to go to Cuba on vacation, but they didn't want to be disconnected from the rest of the world. in Cuba at that time, there were 2 television channels. One channel was what I'm gonna call the communist channel, telling you how Cuba was the best place in the world and how the rest of the world was a disaster, and then how all the different goals for food production were being met, and how all the workers' paradise was being built, and of course everything was perfect. And then in the other channel, you had a guy there looking at you, telling you, what are you doing here? Turn to the other channel. So this wouldn't fly with the tourists. So they decided that they were gonna build this super secretive network of inter-hotel television communications. So they put together, in one big satellite dish that they had in central Cuba, they started bringing in, capturing some channels from the US satellite, and then distributing them in this really secretive high frequency to all the hotels, of course, in a frequency that you could not pick up with a regular TV antenna. Remember, this is the early 90s, and in Cuba, there was no internet. There's barely internet today. So, of course, people couldn't pick it up with their regular TVs, but they put the signal out in the open. And of course, a group of people decided that, and saw this happening, and they saw these weird antennas going up at the hotels, and we started wondering, hey, what is this? Of course, the word gets around that hotels are getting this special television, and I was 15 years old at the time. And I was lucky. That's a picture of my dad there with our ham radio setup, that I grew up in the world of electronics and tinkering and playing with all these things. And I figured out with a group of friends that with an old Soviet radio, coffee can, and some wiring, we could actually build a homemade satellite dish and start watching the forbidden channels. All of a sudden, I'm watching CNN, which in Cuba is far right. And, because you're getting news from the world, and then I'm watching the back to the Cuban network and say, well, this doesn't add up. This doesn't make any sense. And then your mind starts to open up and you start receiving new information. All this actually led me a few years later to be one of the first people to actually have a home built computer, an email address, and actually led me to leave the island. Now, when I built my first satellite dish, it was completely homebrewed, but I was able to create a network of people that helped me put these satellite dishes together. And I got really lucky because I basically didn't know how to get the components. I had no idea where to buy them. The first set, it was something that we have purchased from some parts from the parts store, but those ran out. So I asked my dad, and I asked him, hey, where do you buy these components? And no idea. I'd never been out of Cuba. I'd never seen a magazine, electronics magazine from outside of Cuba. I had no idea. So my dad said, oh, you go to this place called Radio Shack. And this could have been the most powerful answer I've gotten in my life about anything, because you could have probably asked that question to 10 million people in Cuba. They wouldn't have known the answer. So in Cuba, there were a lot of shacks, but not many of them had the word radio in them. So I built this, started building satellite dishes and started selling them. Of course, this was not necessarily something that the Cuban government held in high regard, but eventually this led for me leaving the country. Right before I left, there was a lot of social unrest, people trying to live in every way they could, but I was lucky enough that through my mother, I was able to basically go and leave the island legally. And I come to the States with a completely new perspective in the world, which is, I have no idea how anything works. I didn't know how an ATM worked when I got here. And I spoke very little English. And I could tell you two things for sure about the English language. I knew for a fact that Tom was a boy and Mary was a girl, okay? So I get to the United States at 18. Here's my picture of the before. This is the now, the after. My family calls the first picture the X-ray. And come here and started working really hard. I knew that I wanted a future for me and for my family. And eventually went to work for Cisco Systems, became a network engineer, worked with some of the largest companies in the country as a consultant, and then went out on my own and started started appearing in Spanish television, and found that people really needed that connection to technology, that all this technology and all this knowledge that had literally liberated me was something that I could use to help others and help them to grow. So started showing up on TV, and of course, everything snowballs from there. And then a few years ago, I've spoken all over the country about technology and innovation. And one of my favorite programs that we work with was through the California Office for Economic Development for the community colleges, where we actually set up these huge events all over the state, bringing in Hispanics and talking to them about technology and resources and things that they could do to get ahead, to get their businesses ahead. And it was really informative, and I learned as much from them as they learned from me. What I found really interesting during that time is that all the community colleges, specifically in California, they had all of these resources available for the people. But when you went and asked the people, they didn't necessarily know about it. So there was this huge gap in communication between what's available and what people know that's available, because it's hard to get the word out. And you guys know very well that this can be a huge challenge. So in this case, I went in Spanish speaking television and talked about these programs. And of course, we got lucky enough that we were able to fill these huge auditoriums, and a lot of people came and learned about what was available. So going back to innovation and why is it important? When I was building my satellite dish, I knew I wasn't the only one that knew about this. I had to ask a lot of people, and I had to bring a lot of people to collaborate to know about the different components and how we put it together, and then how we scaled it. So when it comes to innovation, it's really about new ways of looking at things. It's about not only who do you bring to the table, but what is necessary, what is their gender, their ethnicity, their life experience, and what is the likelihood that this mix is going to increase creativity, which is one of the major underpinnings of innovation. So when you try to solve a problem, you're going to have the information that you have. Your mind is limited to based on what you live with, based on where you come from, and you're going to have limited visibility. The more people, the more angles that you can add to this, the higher visibility that you can bring to the table, and then it's a matter of really executing them. So what ends up happening in many places is that we surround ourselves with people like us. This human. We like to talk to, and we like to work with people that we like, that we understand each other. So when there's somebody that is different, that initial culture shock actually can hinder innovation. There's a friend of mine that also talks about innovation that said, try to work and try to discuss these things with people that you don't necessarily agree with, because out of that a creative collision is where really good ideas come from. Now, there is a research that was done by Harvard Business Review, and they found that diversity really can empower and really unlock innovation in different organizations. They did a national survey of over 1,800 professionals, and they found in over 40 case studies and different focus groups that they differentiated between inherent diversity and acquired diversity. So inherent diversity is who you are, basically your ethnicity, your race, and then acquired diversity is all your traits and the experience that you acquired, where you travel, the places that you work with. And then the companies, the organizations that had what they call this 2D diversity, they had a higher rate. They found that they were 45% likelier to report growth in market share over the previous year, and 70% likelier to report that this firm had actually captured a new market. Now, what's interesting about this is that you find that super huge companies like the Coca-Cola companies, only one out of the last CEOs grew up in the United States. So it means that many of these companies have found that people with diverse experiences can give them a better global perspective. Now, it doesn't have to be the case. There's another study from the Boston Consulting Group and the Technical University of Munich that they found different correlations. They studied a number of companies, and they found they use this index called the Blau index, which measures diversity. The higher the index, depending on the criteria that you put here, but basically the higher the number, the more diversity that the organization had. And they found that the companies with the greatest, for example, gender diversity, generated about 34% of their revenue from innovative products. But what they found, for example, in the case of gender, is that it really didn't matter how many women they had in the workspace if the number of women in management were not represented at over 20%. So it's not just having people on the team that are diverse, but also management needed to be diverse, so these people could actually feel represented and they could open the ideas and get those ideas approved. So they found that industry background was very highly correlated with innovation, country of origin was highly correlated, career path as well, and of course, gender. So what happens? When you don't have some of these ingredients, things start to fail. And it doesn't mean that the products and that we produce are going to be defective, but they might lack vision. In this case, this is a case study. I found this the other day browsing Twitter, and I found that this professor was complaining that a faculty member actually, when they were using the virtual backgrounds on Zoom, that their head was getting cut off, and his colleague is African American. But then I remembered that over 10 years ago, Hewlett-Packard had a similar problem. The algorithm designed to track the movements of the camera on the HP computers in 2009, we're talking about 11 years ago, also couldn't track people, African Americans on camera. So what that tells you is that obviously there was not an African American involved in the quality assurance process here. And many of these algorithms, there is the data scientist, Kathy O'Neill, she's a PhD in math from Harvard, said that algorithms are opinions embedded in code. Algorithms are not objective and they're not necessarily true or scientific. They're really, if the people that are creating them don't have all the different perspectives, these algorithms start making decisions and they really start changing the world in front of us, and we start losing visibility. Excuse me. So innovation really is about cross-pollination. It's really about bringing all these ideas together from different fields, from different ethnicities, from different experiences. So I wanted to give you guys an exercise. Normally, this is something that I do with a big audience and you get all kinds of really interesting answers. But today, since we are in a limited virtual platform, I'm gonna sort of play both sides here. So in 1989, some of you may remember the Exxon Valdez tanker disaster in Prince William Sound in Alaska, where over 10 million gallons of crude oil were dumped into the water, and it was a huge disaster, a huge environmental problem. And although some of this oil was recovered, they found the problem, which is the Arctic. It's a very cold place. And then the oil started freezing, it started mixing with ice, and they couldn't pump it properly. So the people trying to do the oil recovery had a real hard time, and they found that they couldn't find a solution. So this is the time where I tell the audience that I name you consultants to the oil industry and to give me a really good solution. And you hear all kinds of creative solutions from the audience. You hear, oh, how about we warm it up with huge fires? And then that's the part that I tell them, hey, you know, fire and oil, doesn't necessarily mix. And then the guy comes back to me and says, well, I've only been a consultant for the oil industry for 5 minutes. Okay, give me a break. But the reality is that this problem took 20 years to be solved. 20 years. Something that when you look back, it seems incredible. And what ended up happening is that they were posting this challenge to only people in the oil industry. So even when they use a platform called Innocentive, which is a company that has a large network of experts from different disciplines who solve all kinds of complex problems, and they get awarded monetary prizes. When they posted this challenge initially, they only posted it as an oil industry problem. But then they were able to get out of that box, and they were able to pose this challenge as a really fluid dynamics problem. And they opened it up to anybody. What they found is that there was a chemist that had created a device that vibrates the molecules of concrete so it doesn't solidify. And they use a similar solution with the frozen oil, so they were able to pump it and problem solve. It only took them 20 years to figure this out. The solution was there, was in a different industry. They just didn't have the initial visibility to really even ask the right questions. So it's really important what kind of questions we're asking. And that's why opening up yourself to different cultures and different industries is really important. Now, what do emergency rooms and Formula One pit crews have in common? And this is another really interesting case study. The Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London had a problem. And the problem was whenever they did a handoff from surgery to the intensive care unit, that it was very complicated. There were many people involved, and then they were actually losing patients, and they had a lot of complications that were resulting from this handoff, especially heart transplant and really sensitive operations. One day, one of the doctors is sitting down in the break room. He was a big fan of Formula One, and he's looking at a pit crew, a Formula One pit crew, and he says that it's a perfectly orchestrated and a perfectly choreographed operation. The car comes in, they change the tires, they put oil, fuel, get everything ready in 2.5 seconds, and they're out with the 0% error rate. So he said, why don't we talk to these people? So they got in touch with the Ferrari pit crew, and they asked him to send a video of what this handout normally looked like, what this operation was like. And what ended up happening was that they were able to reduce the amount of errors by something like 30–40% in this handoff, based on the Ferrari pit crew's observations on how the surgeon had to move, how the different nurses had to interact, and how the bed and the different instrumentation was positioned. So it was really about stepping outside of the industry to a completely different one to gain perspective. So you find this blindness that not only happens inside your own industry, but also across the world, when one industry thinks that they can solve the other industry's problem using only their perspective. So can anybody tell me what this is? And I'm going to keep the interaction slow because this is this Zoom meeting. So this is a neonatal incubator, and a neonatal incubator has one basic function. That basic function is to keep newborns warm. This is a huge problem worldwide. There are statistics that say that over 4 million babies die before their first birthday, and half of those could actually make it if they could only be kept in an incubator for a few days. It's a huge problem in the developing world. So what ends up happening is that many companies donate their really fancy incubators to developing countries. And what ends up happening is that they get there, they have all these advanced parts, they don't have a network of people that can repair them, and then they are used for a little bit, and then they are thrown away because it's impossible to keep them in service. So this company out of Boston said, well, why don't we try to change this? Why don't we build an incubator with parts that you can find in these countries? And they went, they did the research, and they found that in some of these places, there was one skill that was really prevalent, which was they kept the cars running. They knew mechanics. They knew how to tinker and deal with car parts. So they built the NeoNurture, which is an infant incubator, and the group that created this is called Design That Matters. They created a neonatal incubator that uses only car parts. Brilliant, amazing idea, wins design prizes all over the place, is in the cover of Time magazine as one of the best innovations, and then The problem was that the only time that this incubator had a baby in it was when they were taking the picture for a Time Magazine Design Award, because they didn't have the networks to distribute them in the countries where they thought this could be a great innovation. They didn't understand the logistics and how, for example, in these countries, there were central healthcare systems that were making these huge purchasing decisions, and that they really wanted something that looked fancy. They didn't want something that necessarily didn't look like a medical equipment. So there are a lot of biases and a lot of preconceptions that they were, you know, inexplicable. You say, what are you talking about? Are these people, what are they thinking about? But at the end, it wasn't successful. So they came back and said, well, let's try again. We have all these great ideas. What are we going to do now? For the next round, they actually went to a manufacturer of medical equipment in Vietnam. And instead of telling them, hey, look at what we designed for you, they did something wonderful. They did something unheard of. They asked a question. And this question was, what do you need? And they said, well, the problem that we're having is with newborn jaundice, which kids need treatment. And what ends up happening is that they realize that all this, you know, there are two types of treatments for newborn jaundice. You can do a really complicated blood transfusion, or you can put them under a blue light for a few days. Now, on the left here, you see how the traditional machine that is used here in the US is used to treat newborn jaundice. But then when they took it to a hospital in a developing country, they would actually put a bunch of babies under the light. What ended up happening that only the baby in the middle was really treated appropriately, and other ones around them were not getting enough amount of light. So they tried to eliminate all the problems out of the equation, and they created this amazing device to treat newborn jaundice that, well, first of all, it fits only one baby. It's called the Firefly. So there was no chance of putting other babies around it because it just didn't work with it. So they removed the problems out of the design equation. It's super energy efficient, it's easy to move. And they found that one of the interesting problems is that when mothers would come in to visit with their babies, they saw their baby there with very little clothing, and they thought the babies were cold. So what they would do is that they would take and they would cover the babies. And of course, you covering the baby, the light is not flowing, they're not getting the necessary treatment. So they actually put lamps not only on top, but also below. So in case this happened, the baby was still being treated. And it's become a super successful device with one of the lowest cost per treatment in the industry. It was simple to clean, and it was just a complete success. But it was approach from a prescriptive approach, which is, oh, this is what you guys need, here you go, to what do you guys need? Let's work together and let's figure it out. So, and this happens across, you know, many industries. You have industries that are experts. For example, Unilever wanted to develop this whitening toothpaste, and they didn't want it to have bleach and abrasives, but the toothpaste experts didn't have a solution. So they realized that there was a different business unit that made detergents that whitens clothes and they don't use any bleach. And what they told them, hey, we use this bluing agent that actually makes things look whiter. And they found a combination of that and created this whitening toothpaste. When you look at other industries, it's really about opening up and the risks of opening up and technically asking for help. Goldcorp is a mining operation that in the middle of the 90s, their market was depressed. Their operating costs were through the roof, the miners were on strike. And the biggest problem is that they had this amazing and this huge terrain, but they couldn't find the gold. They knew there was gold in there, but they couldn't find it. So the CEO did the unthinkable, which is he took all the data that they had, the seismic data and all the studies that they've done, and he actually published them. But on top of that, he put a price on finding all these different gold pockets. And what he did when he exposed this, again, remember, this is the gold industry, very secretive, very private. All the experts were telling them, you're crazy, what are you gonna do? Well, what ended up happening is that after publishing all the data, they started receiving all the different targets that they had to aim for. And in 5 years, this is a mine that was producing 53,000 ounces at $360 an ounce. And in 5 years, it was producing 504,000 ounces, so 10 times basically at $59 an ounce, which is a fraction of where the money that they were getting this gold out of the ground for. And they only spent technically $500,000. So this cross-pollination, you see it across industries. So let me play a quick sample of a song for you guys. I'm sure you've heard it before. I'm not gonna keep playing the song. You guys probably know what song I'm talking about. It's that famous Cher song. And this was the first song that used a technology called autotune. Since then, it's been horrible because it's being used all over the place. But this technology actually came from a completely different industry. The inventor came from the oil industry, where all companies would detonate charges in the ground, and then they would have all these sensors analyze the reflections to basically spot the oil. And the technology that they use, the signal processing, was the technology that he used to create autotune, which basically, even if you're singing out of tune, you're missing notes, the software will actually correct it. What's interesting is that since then, there are singers that have been taking this to a whole new level, like Kanye, but that now you also see the application in different technologies like pacemakers that are using a similar algorithm to know if the heart is in having the right rhythm and shock it appropriately. So you see application of this technology through in different industries. Now, you know who this guy is, and he famously said, good artists copy, great artists steal, and we are shameless about stealing a good idea. Of course, these words came out to haunt him because people said, well, we know what you've been doing. And the reality is that at the beginning, they copied a lot of the ideas for the original Macintosh from this computer that is a Xerox Alto. It's actually in the Museum of American History in DC, and it's a really good example of what it could have been. We could have all been using Xerox compatible computers, but they actually were the first computer that had a graphical user interface, that had printing, that had a mouse, that had all these technologies. And then how they were never commercialized because all the Xerox people, they said, well, we're in the copier business. Why would we go into this computer business? But years later, you see that the original iPod is really a hodgepodge of all these different technologies. iPod was not the first portable music device. Sony actually had the title for that. And there were MP3 players that were a lot cheaper in the market that play music just fine. What Apple did is that they put together this new invention, which was really a hodgepodge of existing pieces. You had a Toshiba hard drive, you had power management from Linear Technology, you had the iTunes software that used to be a company called SoundJam, you had the interface controller that came from Texas Instruments, and they put all this together into an ecosystem, and then people they adopted because it was actually easy to use. Before, to be able to download the music was really cumbersome, and you had to burn your CDs and do all these things that today we live in a digital world. We don't remember what this was like, but it was actually pretty frustrating, and then they eliminated a lot of that frustration. So this frustration is actually a good thing. And when I hear you guys that you're telling me and you're saying, hey, we want to improve things here, we know it can be better, that frustration can really be a point of inspiration. And you have companies like Netflix that was started when Reed Hastings, the CEO, got a $40 late fee for renting Apollo 13. And a few months later, when he was ready to start a business, he had sold his previous business and said, what are we going to do? He said, well, how about we start this DVD mailing business? And he started with a humble 1,000 title DVD rental library. And the website looked like this, which you wouldn't think much of it. But today it's actually worth $207 billion, and Blockbuster is gone. the interesting thing of this is that right at the beginning, once they had amassed some business, it was really complicated. They hadn't really gone into the streaming business yet. And they went and met with the CEO of Blockbuster, and they wanted to sell him the company for $50 million. Back then, Blockbuster was worth $6 billion. And they wouldn't want to pay $50 million for this little startup. So the rest is history. Today, there's only one Blockbuster in Alaska. All of the others are gone. And if you follow their Twitter feed, you're going to have a lot of fun because they are really funny. And the other day I was looking at it and they said, "Oh, we have a customer in the parking lot." Oh, no, never mind. It was actually a couple, divorced couple exchanging kids. So the world can change on a dime, and companies that can start that look like something really small can really scale to something really big. But it's really about many of these processes and a lot of the how they deal with the problems. One of the things that Netflix learned early on is that they had in his previous company, Reed Hastings had what he called an engineer approach to problems, which means that a problem presented itself, then they immediately went out and created a process to solve this problem. So they attacked the problem, they created rules and regulations and processes so it didn't happen again. And of course, as time went by, they kept finding problems and creating processes, and then this company became rigid. So when there were changes in the market, they were not able to adapt because the only people that they had kept were the people that were really good at following process. So all the crazy geniuses and the Picassos of the world said, "I'm not working here, I'm gonna work somewhere else." So market changes and they couldn't adapt. So they had a lot of short-term gains, but they had, in the long term, they actually lost. And I'm glad that you guys referenced the Brookings Institution in the previous talks, because I really was compelled by this concept of the innovation districts and how you have this anchor companies that would come into a geographical area, and then all the different businesses that would be created around it. Like, for example, when Microsoft moved to Seattle, that Seattle back then was not necessarily a really nice place to be in, but you know, Microsoft goes there, and then all the ecosystem that gets launched around it eventually attracts Amazon to go to Seattle. So and you see that in the fight for the Amazon headquarters that happened last year, all the different cities saying, "Come here, it's me, it's me, it's me." The reality is that they really knew where they were going, but they really liked the publicity. But all these innovation ecosystems, when we're looking at geographic areas, then something happened. You know, the pandemic hits, and all the things that make these geographical areas thrive, now they're actually, at least for the foreseeable future, they're not necessarily that attractive. So you have a lot of people leaving New York and leaving a lot of the large cities. They want to go to isolated places. Instead of these large cities that were loved, now they're feared. Now you have the connected workers that are fleeing, trying to find, you know, to the suburbs and trying to find places that are a lot more isolated. And those people that can work from home are going to be doing that for the foreseeable future. So what made some smaller cities and counties and places with less resources unattractive just a year ago, now it actually can make it really attractive to remote workers. So Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, said, and this was only a couple months into the pandemic, he said, "Institutions have gone through 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months." And I agree to an extent, but the reality is that it's been a lot more than 2 months. And what people have learned really well is to start working remotely, but there are still a lot of things that need to be solved. For example, a lot of small businesses are being left behind. You know, you have all these trends now that you have online sales that have increased 42% year over year in August. And this is according to Adobe Analytics. And you have the only other month that was better was July, which the online sales grew 55%. So you have different surveys, one from a company called Payments that says that nearly 36% of the US consumers are now buying retail goods online, which is unheard of. It's a growth of over 30%. And this was at the beginning of the pandemic. Many of these habits are gonna stay. But what happens? You have small businesses that all of a sudden get hit with all this and they fail to adapt. I'm going to give you an example. There's this fish market that we love. In the middle of the a couple months into the pandemic, I said, well, we haven't had a lot of fish. I want to order some fish, but I didn't really want to go pick it up because you don't know what the situation is going to be like. You have no idea. Miami is a crazy place. So we said, well, let's look online. Went online. I found that they actually had a website. I was super excited. Said, wow, this is my time. I'm going to order all this fish. They're going to bring it to my house. I was super happy. I went through their online ordering interface, picked the fish that I liked. And when it came time to check out, the only option that they offered was for us to go pick it up, which is exactly what I didn't want. So automatically, they were alienating half of their customer base, if not more. So many of these small businesses, they don't have the support and the know-how to know that just having the online component is not enough, that you need to offer the full experience. Now, on the flip side, there was this local fruit distributor in the tropical fruit business here in Miami. And due to the coronavirus, all their orders were being canceled. Orders to different supermarkets and restaurants were being canceled. There were problems with distribution. They had problems that restaurants were not ordering produce. The ports were being closed and shipments were being delayed. The produce was spoiling and it was chaotic. So what did they do? They said, well, we always wanted to do direct to consumer and we have all this produce. Well, what are we going to do? They created a site and they realized that they were a traditional food business, that they didn't have necessarily any digital skills. So they partnered with a digital firm and said, you know what? We're going to use a platform that's already there. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. Let's go with Shopify. They said, well, how are we going to deliver? Well, we're going to use traditional carriers. And then they created a process. In a week, they had a fruit store up and running online and orders started coming in. And one of the challenges that they had at the beginning is like, well, how do we take pictures of the fruit and how do we put all this online? And they said, you know what? We're going to go with what we have. The guy at the warehouse takes a picture with their camera phone, and that's the picture that gets published and ready to go. In less than 6 months, they sold about $1.5 million in fruit online. And the growth there is of 1,416%. Which is remarkable. It might not seem like a lot of money, but for a small business that was cash strapped, that their original business idea was really crumbling, was a lifeline. And it's only because they were able to pivot and they had the right people that told them, hey, this is how you have to go about it. What happened is that this contactless economy has taken a lot of people off guard. And even the supermarkets and some of the larger organizations have a hard time adapting. For restaurants, it's been really, really hard. For example, there's this concept that it's been going for a while, but all of a sudden it exploded, the concept of the cloud kitchen. And the cloud kitchen is basically a restaurant that is not a restaurant. It's basically a commercial kitchen. And this commercial kitchen, all the ordering is done through online interfaces like Uber Eats or Grubhub. And what they found is that when they use these commercial kitchens, restaurants would actually save a lot of money and they could launch 5 or 6 virtual restaurants from one single location. So they could really diversify and be able to really serve their customers without all the super high costs of the front end of the restaurants that were associated with it. So similar problems. When one of the things that you find is that many people have had a similar problem that you've had. And a small country in 2010 had a similar problem than what you guys are saying that you have in Pennsylvania. And this country, the problem was, the population was 19 million, was a little bit more than PA, but they had their economy was really dependent in only one export. They felt that they had very low and very little young entrepreneurial spirit. How did they find this out? Well, this is basically what they said. And their young people didn't want to start businesses. They didn't know what to do. So they wanted to shift the economy to a more knowledge-based economy. They wanted to attract entrepreneurs from all over the world. And they wanted to create and inject knowledge into this local economy so they could grow it. So they launched an initiative called Startup Chile. And what they did is that they said, listen, we're going to offer you guys $40,000 in 6 months here in the country. We're going to facilitate the visa process, and then we're going to give you training. We're going to give you mentors. We're going to plug you to our community. And then you see how hard it is to get into the United States. We're actually going to make it very easy to get into Chile with your idea. What ended up happening 8 years later, it was one of the top 10 accelerators in the world. It had a portfolio of over 1,600 startups, over 4,500 entrepreneurs from 85 countries. But the reality, the impact was beyond. Basically, the initial government investment was returned over 18 times, and they had a portfolio of billions of dollars. And it's really about growing this startup and innovation ecosystem in the country. And that what's interesting is that they went and they partnered with a technology company in Silicon Valley. It's called Unoodle, that they would help them with this whole process. Initially, they had that initial investment. They found that many companies would actually leave Chile after they were done with the 6 months. So they created follow-up funds to be able to invest in these companies as they grew, and they were able to attract a lot of talent. And you had the survival rate was actually really good in compared to the venture capital world of over 50%, which is really remarkable. So what can diversity do to make your organization more creative? Well, if you have a large organization, definitely diversity really fosters creativity. You have, it will help these organizations be more creative, create better products and services, and it's really good for the bottom line. You have, workplace diversity was for many years a soft sell because it was very hard to quantify. But then you have different studies that have come online, including one from McKinsey that says that U.S. public companies with diversity on their executive boards have a 95 higher returns on equity than those companies that don't have this diversity in their boards. So there are 6 behaviors that really unlock innovation, no matter the size of the company or the organization that you're operating. It's really ensuring that everyone is heard. You have not only having the diversity, making sure that these people actually have a voice, making it safe to propose new ideas, really giving people from these groups decision-making authority, sharing credit for success, giving actionable feedback, and implementing this feedback for the team. So something interesting that I found through working with many minority entrepreneurs and minority businesses is that in the last 10 years, 50% of new businesses were really started by minorities, which is significant. They've created over 4.7 million jobs. They have over 4 million minority-owned companies in the countries with sales close to $700 billion. But many of these companies, what they really need early on is access to capital. It's very hard, especially when you're a minority, to go to a bank. That minorities have less assets, they have lower credit scores to access traditional forms of financing to start their businesses. And for many people, I've seen that the closest they can get to a venture capital is going to a payday loan or something with preposterous terms to be able to get their businesses launched. Now, what I'm seeing is that you have companies such as Google and Facebook and Microsoft that are saying they're seeing a gap in minority and small businesses, and they're pouncing. They're saying, okay, we're going to educate you, we're going to teach you how to do all these things, and you're going to be able to learn to market with us, and you're going to be successful. And what I found that for small businesses to succeed using these platforms is becoming more and more complex every single day. So for Google to come in and say that they're going to be helping small businesses, teaching them how to market, is like the lion giving diet advice to the sheep. When you bring in the small business that doesn't necessarily have the knowledge to succeed in these highly complex platforms, they end up spending money that they don't have, and the success might not necessarily materialize. And that gap needs to be filled, and it cannot be filled by the people selling the shovels to the miners. It has to be filled by people that have the interest for them in becoming successful. So continuous innovation is really a diverse team sport, no matter the size of your organization. Diversity isn't just something that is really nice to have. It's not something that looks good on paper. It's not a requirement, a checkbox. if you really implement it, if you really embrace it, the results are there, they're proven. It's really not about hiring different types of people. It's really about opening up your mind to open dialogue to different perspectives. And those perspectives are gonna take time to materialize, but they're really gonna make your organization grow and allow your company to thrive. So thank you so much for your time today. And I'm here if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Ariel. It's great to hear so many interesting observations about the connections between innovation and diversity, and certainly aligns with what we're trying to accomplish through the Invent Penn State initiative. I want to share with everyone that today's program is being recorded, and we're going to make sure that everyone is able to have access to it. Beyond that, if there is a quick question or two, we'll be able to handle that, but we bumped up against our Zoom time availability, so we're going to have to wrap up here very momentarily. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Special thanks to Rob Wonderling and Jim Gerlach, James Delattre, and Ariel for his comments today. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of you in order to move forward the entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem in the greater Reading community. Take care all. Thank you.